Hey, Nobi. I'm doing fine. How's school going?
What?
How's school going for you? Oh, for Nobi. Let's see, and who is, okay, good. Let's see, who's on financial aid? I've got a financial aid button.
Somehow
Oh, I can't hear you.
one got added to my.
I'm still not hearing you. It's cutting out.
Is this any better?
Nope.
It's pretty bad. Sorry.
That's all right. Who is it?
Abigail.
Abigail. Okay, super. All right.
I won't
Yeah.
stay long.
I'm sorry.
I cannot stay long.
Okay. If you do talk, get a little closer to your computer or your phone.
Yeah, my microphone is broken, so it's not very good.
Okay. Well, that's better. Right there where you were talking, I could hear you. Okay, and there's Logan signing in. All right.
We're
Okay.
on.
So we've got Abigail. It'll be Logan. Who's there with you?
I have Alicia,
Oh,
Alyssa, so sorry.
it's okay.
Alyssa and Ashley and Grace, and then me, Logan.
Alyssa, Ashley, and who? Grace.
Just fighting in class today.
I know about Josh. Anybody else? Just the four of you?
Just the four of us.
Okay.
Josh is coming. Josh is coming from work.
Josh is coming from work. Okay.
Yeah. He's had some car issues too, so
Oh
see
no.
what happens. All right. Who'd like to open in prayer?
I can do it.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this time that we have here. Help us to study and learn and grow in our understanding of music history and literature. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Good. Thank you. All right. So I'm working with the IT guys. I think we're going to have a workaround on the music, because one of the tough things about teaching music history and not being able to actually hear the music is that I'm relying on you, because we haven't talked about the music. We've only talked about the history part. And so I'm relying on you to go back to your book, play the examples that I've given you and your listening journal, and then hope you can pick out some of the things that the book mentions to make sense of it. So that's not an ideal way to teach this class. I would hope normally maybe a third of the time we're actually listening to actual music. So now I know we're covering a lot of information, but what I'd like to do moving forward is shift more of the book reading over to you after this class, shift more of the book reading over to you and shift more of the music over to me. And so what we'll end up doing, I think, I've already talked to IT. They said they think it'll work, but I still need to run some tests on it to make sure. I could test this class, but if it doesn't work, then it puts you at a disadvantage. So, but what I'll do is actually, and I should have this in place for next week, is I'll actually still teach with Teams. And as I'm teaching, I can share my computer screen and sound. Right now I can share the computer screen, but the sound is hiccuping on me. So it's not, the sound isn't working. but I'll be able to share the computer screen and the computer sound so that you can actually look at my computer and hear what I'm hearing, and switch back and forth between that and me lecturing, and then record that and then also post it. Now, the problem, of course, with posting it on YouTube is that YouTube will kick it off. Even though what we do as educators, we're allowed to take parts of copyrighted material and use them for educational purposes. And that's exactly what we'll be doing. And that's legal, but YouTube doesn't know where that it takes a conscious effort on YouTube's part then to override their algorithms to let our videos on to their site, which is possible, but every single video then has to go through an approval process at YouTube, and it's not posted. It can take a while until it can be posted, so it's not postable in real time. So when I'm done with this class, within 20 minutes or a half hour of finishing this class, this video is available to everyone else who wants to watch it online. So YouTube doesn't have a good system now to have the video approved for broadcast. So what we're going to do is bypass the YouTube channel. Not this class. This class is going on YouTube. Okay. So for this class, I'm not going to play any music. But starting with the next class, starting with next week, what I hope to happen is still record in Teams. Then I'm going to take the Teams video. I'm going to upload it to my OneDrive in Microsoft. And then I'm going to share the video with everybody from the class. So you'll be able to go directly to my OneDrive and watch the video from my OneDrive. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So if I do this, it means that classes, the last 3 classes of this course will not be available through Canvas. You'll actually have to access it through, you'll get a link and you'll have to click on that link to get the video. And then if you have a problem and you lose the link, you just have to email me and I can share it with you again. So that's what's coming up. I hope next week. If not, we'll just do it the same way we've been doing it, but we'll see what happens. So, I found a wonderful piece by Ockham, Deo Gratias 36. And it's a 36 voice canon. So when you're done with the class, you can Google Johannes Ockham. So it'd be like Johannes Ockeghem, Ockham, and Deo Gratias 36. Very cool piece. It is a canon, which is like a round, and it's scored for 36 voices. And it sounds probably what music sounds like in heaven. So very cool piece and rarely done because you got to find 36 people to sing it. So, but let's continue here. Maybe I'll start next week with that, but it'll be the wrong style period next week. We'll be in the Baroque. Okay, a few notes. I have everything graded through everything that you've handed in except for your exams. I have about half the exams at this point, and as you know, I gave you an extension because of the weird machinations of Canvas last week. Made it very difficult to do anything. So I've extended the exam to Tuesday. Those of you who've already taken it, was it harder or easier than you thought it would be?
Easier.
Okay, so like a little easier or a lot easier?
I would say that the questions were easy, but it took a really long time to actually do the test.
Okay, so tell me how long you spent, those of you who've already turned it in. Oh, nobody says that it was what I was expecting.
I don't know exactly because I took breaks
Yeah.
in between, but it took a long time.
Yeah. Mine took probably said it was probably 3 or 4 hours.
3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, I
Who
also
is,
took breaks. So.
who is that?
Ashley?
Ashley? Okay, 3 or 4 hours. All right. Nobi, how long did it take you? She said somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. Okay. All right. So what I'm getting is the feedback I need for when I write the next test. The next test will look a lot like this test. If we do have it, if for some reason we can have it during class, I do it a little differently, but otherwise we'll leave it at that, and maybe we can talk more about it next week after I've corrected the exams. So remember on the exam, I hope by the time you take it that ideally I write it so that you can take the exam without going back and even looking at your book. And if the place that'll add time is actually looking things up in the book. So if you can get the stuff down, and you can see that the exam covered the stuff that we talked about. So if you can get the stuff down during class and study in that way, then when you actually take the exam, you don't even have to open the book. So ideally, that's the fastest way to take it. Let's see. Any other comments, questions about the exam?
So are all of the questions that will be on the test be discussed in class, or just some of them? And then the rest of it, we just search?
Most of them. Most of them. What'll happen is I'm trying to hit, when I prep a lecture for this, I'm sure you can tell, I try to, there's multiple ways I can teach this. What I'm trying to do is stay pretty much with how the book follows things. It's so you should be, I'm trying to make it easy for you to reference, like for instance, if I'm talking about the Bianchico, okay, so if I'm talking about the Bianchico in Spain, and I'm rambling on about the Bianchico, you should be able to go to your book and say, okay, I missed something in the lecture, and read through the book and see what the book says. It should be pretty close to what I'm saying, but I'm using the book, the chapter outlines in the book to prepare the lecture so that you can follow those back and forth if you need to. So that way you can, if you need more reading on it, and I skip a bunch of stuff, obviously, I'm not doing the whole book, but as I'm going through, if I'm talking about the Bianchico, I'm hitting things that I think are the most important of that whole section on the Bianchico. And then if you need more information on it, you would go back and read the rest of the part of that chapter. Now, Grace, I'm going to answer a question that I think you're asking, and that is, if you listen to my lecture, and if you compare it with the book, you'll notice that the lecture has about 25% of the material that's in the book, right? Maybe sometimes more, sometimes less. Am I testing the material in the book or the material from my lecture? The answer is this: the material in the book is important and you need to know it. The lecture highlights the things that I think are the most important part of what the book says. And when I write the test based on the things that I think are most important. Does that help? Okay. Now, what I don't want you to hear is that I'm not testing what's in the book. What I do want you to hear is if all you had was the lecture, you would do fine on the test. There might be something I would expect that's in the book that I didn't have in the lecture, but that's usually not the case. Most of what I'm talking about is what I base my testing on. And even the and you'll notice even the essay questions that I ask. I'm trying to ask essay questions not only on the exam but also on our weekly essays. I'm trying to ask essay questions that make you think beyond just regurgitating what's in the book or what you hear in the lecture. I'm trying to get you to think beyond that. So if I ask the question, oh, let's see, nobody's asking us if the second exam is over the whole book. No, it'll just be over chapters 11 through 19. So first test over 1 through 10, second test over 11 through 19. So I want to ask questions that I hope you can, no problem. I'm trying to, she said thanks, so I just answered her. I'm trying to ask questions that get you to think outside of the text, and also that that you're not that there. I mean, if I were in your case, or if I were in your shoes, and I got an essay question, or I got to, define this, I would be second guessing myself probably. What I'd try to do is answer the question, and then when I got the question answered, I would probably go back and Google it and see if I got all the important stuff. The danger in doing that is that the important stuff, that whatever Google or Wiki thinks is the important stuff may not be the stuff that I think is the important stuff. So when I asked you about in the last, let's see, in one of the last essay question 2 weeks ago, I asked about Ars Nova and Ars Antiqua. The answer is simple. Philip de Vitry, two new things that are happening with rhythm, duple rhythm and a shortening of what they actually write the rhythm in, and that's the difference, the big differences, and that makes it possible then for all this cool rhythmic stuff to arise. There's plenty of rhythms and writing of rhythms in Ars Antiqua. That's the issue. Isn't that they could now write rhythm. The issue is they could write rhythm in duples and smaller, ever smaller minims in smaller bite-sized pieces, and it made it possible, all that crazy rhythmic stuff. So that comes straight from my lecture, and of course straight from the book. If you go and put in Ars Nova and Ars Antiqua into Wikipedia, you're going to be hit with a massive chunk of information that'll bog you down. Now, in a 250-word essay, all I'm looking for are the key stuff. The Philip de Vitry, the same stuff we had in class. Philip de Vitry, the two things that happen with rhythm, and that's the compare and the contrast between those two style periods. And that's what you really need to know about Ars Nova and Ars Antiqua. So don't get fooled into thinking going to Google is going to get you the right answer, because and like I say, you definitely don't want to do that for the exam, because with the exam, you're going to be giving me so much stuff, and I just look at it as fluff. All I'm looking for, I don't want fluff, I don't want filler, I don't want Wikipedia. I want what I'm talking about, and I want maybe, and you can reinforce it from the book. I'm trying not to say anything that isn't in the book, and if anything I do say in the different than the book means that I thought it was important enough that I should say it. So the book certainly isn't complete. And when you're talking about these huge expanses of time, some folks are going to think this is important, and some folks are going to think that's important. This class used to be taught by one of our string teachers, and I remember talking to the string teacher, I remember talking about, well, how do you handle opera? Because opera is a huge part of Baroque. And she just kind of looked at me and it's like, well, that's not my area of strength, which is, well, I just kind of go over what's in the book and I don't really talk much about it. But on the other hand, you know, obviously I'm a vocalist, so it's going to be, I'll bring out aspects of opera that maybe a non-opera person isn't going to know, but things I still think are important. So a lot of it is dependent on the teacher. A lot of it's dependent on the text, but the main thing is that we're giving you, but you still need to know what Ars Nova is. Oh, by the way, somebody spelled it A-R-E-S. It's actually, ours is actually A-R-S, Ars, art, new art, Ars Nova. So thought I'd mention that. But great question. Does that answer it? Okay, you should be able to take the exam without referencing the text. But the reason for the text is so that, you know, if you're going off my notes and you miss something in the notes, you can go back and pick it up in the text. There's tons, there's so much information that I'm throwing at you that believe me, you should by now figure out that, especially from the exam, you should figure out that I'm not expecting you to know everything cover to cover, including the bibliography at the end. Okay, it's just too much. But what I do expect you to know is the stuff that I told you on the very first day of class. My lectures, read the book, and know what the highlighted terms are. Okay, so or any, you know, if you see a term in the margin, in that kind of gold script in the margin, you should be taking a look at those, because whatever it is, they're putting that in there as a finder. So case in point, one of you emailed me and said, was talking about text depiction, and they couldn't find any bolded terms that said text depiction. Well, text depiction is a broad term for text painting and text declamation. That's all part of text depiction. And over on the side of that chapter, I think it was chapter 10, over on the side of one paragraph, it said text depiction. And that's why I put it in your terms, because it's a general term for what's happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Essays. A couple essays this last time were short, 25, 30, 45, 50 words. Just a few things about the essay. If you hand in less than 250 words, I will take away some points. Just do 250 words. I know that sounds like it's a stickler. I sound like a legalist, don't I? But I guess in this case I am. And this should be obvious, but don't count your name, the date, and the title of your essay in the 250 words. You understand that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Works the same way with your research paper. When you do your research paper, don't count the title page, the name, the page numbers, or the bibliography as part of your text. That's not the way it works. Count the text. Great.
So there was no essay question this week, right? That's what I understood.
Correct. No essay questions.
Just to make sure.
So simple. All you had was, what you could have done for this week was the listening for chapters 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah.
So you should have 3 chapters, 6 pieces. At this point, actually, you should have chapter 1 through 10. Oops, I got a question. Can we use our book as a source for our research paper? Okay. Normally you don't use a textbook for research papers because a textbook is just nothing but another research paper, highly annotated and cited. And so normally what I would want you to do is send you back to the original documents. That is, look at the bibliography for the textbook, and then go back and check the original sources for your citations. I'm going to make an exception for this semester because and I hate to do this, but the whole COVID-19 stuff has so impacted just the act of getting a book is it's almost like we got to write for special dispensation from the Pope or something. So I'm going to allow you to use the textbook, but don't limit it just to the textbook. Okay. If you're writing about something like Hildegard, if you're writing about Hildegard, believe me, there's not enough information in the textbook to make a dent in what you're going to need for the paper. So you can use the textbook. I prefer that you find other sources. So textbook's good, but it's not great. I would find other sources. But yes, you can use the textbook. Good question. All right. So we talked about essays. For the essays, same thing as the exam. Don't answer the essays from Wikipedia. Just don't do it. Can I tell? Yes, I can. Right? Listening journal. Oh, okay. So you should be now. We're through chapter 10. I haven't posted the listening yet and I'll do that today. Post the listening and the terms. And I'm going to post listening, even though we'll just kind of touch chapter 13. I'm going to post the listening for 11, 12, and 13. So you'll have 3 sets of terms. That's 6 pieces. I only have 2 pieces of listening at this point for chapter 13. So there may be some other things in there. We'll see. But I'll get that posted today. You should have, through chapter 10, you should now have 18 pieces at least in your listening journal. That would be chapters 1 through 10, 2 pieces per chapter, but I didn't assign any listening for chapter 7. Make sense? So chapters 1 through 10, not including 7, is 9 chapters times 2 is 18 pieces. So you should have 18 pieces in your listening journal. Please, from here on out, put the chapter that you're doing the listening for. So this last time, from some of you, I got 6 pieces, but no chapters. So to double check and see what you're taking from, I had to go back and check those. So just because I know the pieces, but I don't necessarily know which pieces came from which chapter without referencing the listening. So if you would put chapter 11 and the 2 pieces, and then chapter 12 and the 2 pieces, chapter 13 and the 2 pieces. And if you do that, I'll know 2 things. 1, I'll be able to tell quickly which chapter it came from, and number 2, I'll know that you watched the video because this is the only place I'm going to put it right now. So if you watch the video, you'll do that, and that'll make me really happy. So that's listening. And remember, at the end of this course, you're going to turn in your listening journal for final grade. All right? That's the whole journal, uploaded in a Word document, I hope, and we'll go from there. It's best to upload everything into Canvas in a Word document, because then I can actually, definitely, your research papers have to be in a Word doc, in a Microsoft Word document form, so that I can actually grade it. I can't grade it in Canvas without it being in the form of a Word document. Okay. Topics. Let's see, I need topics from 3 of you. I've got everybody except for 3 of you. And if you received an email from me. If I don't have your topic yet, You received an email from me last night, and please respond quickly so that you can tell me what you'd like to do. I can approve it, and you can get started. I will not accept a paper that has based on a topic that I never approved. So just be aware of that. For next Monday, read through chapter 15. Or that should be just 2 chapters because you've already gone through 13. So read through chapter 15. Always double check previous chapter entries because I do go back and add entries, into the term sheet. Check the term sheet. I do go back and sometimes add to previous chapters. Not normally. I think I've done it once, but I just need to let you know that's a possibility. Let's see, exams due tomorrow night by midnight. Study groups. Are study groups helping?
Yes.
Okay. I still have, if you could, Abigail Dutois is out there and she would love to be part of a study group. Would you guys include Abigail Dutois in your study group the next time you do one?
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Okay. And she's got, you know, and you may have trouble finding a time you can all meet, but at the very least, if you could record, maybe you could record in a Teams meeting and then send it to her so she can look at it. And then, of course, the other, and I think you guys already know about this. I don't want to bore you with stuff you already know, but you know, there's a little Quizlet things. What's the name of that? Is that Quizlet? Is that the name of the site?
Mm-hmm.
There's 3 or 4 great sets of music history cards in Quizlet. And if you haven't already, if you go to those and read through them, and then bring them into your study group, and then talk about, okay, that's what the Quizlet says, but Dr. Stolberg says this is the stuff we really need to work on.
What we've been doing is we've set up a Google document, and we have been filling in each and every definition. Probably mostly from the book. Sometimes we'll combine Quizlet definitions, so that way we're all seeing the same thing. And if anyone online wants a link, I can send that to them, or anyone in the group should be able to send it to them.
Excellent. So Grace says that she has all the terms already defined, and she can share that with anybody that they've done that. I guess it's a group project. All I would say is that if you're going to put all that work in it, make sure that if you are sharing, if you're a person who wants to see the list for study purposes, make sure that you make yourself available to help do some definitions also. That's right. That's fair. Okay. Don't let. Of course, the classmate who does all the work is the one who gets the most out of the class. So, but that's just the way it is. All right. So 2 exams. We've had exam 1 and 1 research paper. And then, of course, your journal listening and weekly essay. So, other questions before we get started? Good. All right. How's school going for everybody?
I'm ready for this cycle to be over.
For this cycle or for this class or both? It's a heavy, I'll tell you, it's a heavy cycle for me. This is the busiest I've been, I think, ever teaching at Calvary.
Oh.
So and it's typical. Last night I worked until 2 in the morning getting ready because I have 2 classes on Monday. So it's not that I waited until Sunday. Every day I'm working on classes and preparing lectures, and it's been a really busy semester. So now the cycle 5, the one coming up, is completely different. I only have 1 class, and I wish I could take half the work from this semester, from this cycle, and put it into next cycle, but it's just it's just the It's the way these cycles work. So, and I am in conversation with, talked to Dr. Bittner about splitting this class into two separate classes over a full semester. I'm not sure, I don't know how you feel about that. The problem with doing that is that it just spreads out over 2 cycles instead of 1 cycle. I don't know that that would be helpful particularly. Same information, it's just, more testing. And you drill down into it in a more deep way. But this is, I don't know, doing it as a survey over 8 classes. I don't know. I think it might not be a bad way to do it. So I'm just thinking out loud. All right. We are into chapter 11. This is a music. I love the Renaissance. I love medieval. Michaud is just a brilliant composer. I love this music. But I love lots of the music from this period. Some of you are really, I'm reading your listening journals, and I'm noticing that you're saying, wow, I listened to this a couple times, and every time I listen to it, I like it more and more, which is what happens with, you can tell the difference between good music and great music. Good music, you listen to it a few times and you love it, and after the 20th time, you get sick of it. Okay? That's good music. And it ages very quickly, because that would be like pop music. Because pop music is constructed in such a way that it self-destructs after a while. That is, it's made with certain markers that make it popular. So when somebody is, like right now, one of the markers in pop Christian music is to sing the melody in a lower octave. And then when you get the second or the third time through, like Cornerstone, then you sing it up an octave. Now that is a very specific marker, specific to the last 7 years of pop music or pop Christian music or contemporary Christian music. It wasn't used before. Really, Cornerstone made it popular. And that device wasn't used before. And now lots of songs have that in it. And that's going to last another probably year or 2 or 3. Then the very things that make it sound new and exciting will start to sound old. So when people start viewing Cornerstone as an old Christian song, then the style that Cornerstone is written in will also be perceived as being old, and people will stop writing those octave jumps for the melody. Okay, that's how it works. So pop music has specific markers that take that song and place it into a very specific band of time. And so, and that include back in the 70s, there was a guy named Barry Manilow. And Barry Manilow was doing static modulations up a half step. And so he'd sing the thing, he'd sing the verse, and then he'd sing the chorus, and then he'd move up a half step and do the chorus again, and then he'd move up a half step and do the chorus again. And it came to be called the Barry Manilow key change. It was static, unprepared, static, and he just moved up, and it kept getting higher and higher. And after a while, and he used it in a ton of songs, and then other people started to use it. And lo and behold, then it became a source of parody. People would put it into songs because of the way, because it's a cheap way to heighten excitement in a song. And so that became a marker. So when you hear music with that little way of dealing with, trying to add excitement to the song by kicking it up, everything up a half step each time you go through it. Not that it hadn't been done before, but it was popularized by Manilow. It dates the song. At the time, it was cool and refreshing and very neat. And then now we look back on it and goes, wow, that sounds so 70s or so 80s. Okay. So that's pop music. Michaud, 1300s. Ein Festberg, the Luther hymn that several of you talked about, that we're still singing that hymn, and it was written 500 years ago. We're still singing it in church. And one of you said, that's my dad's favorite hymn. It was written 500 years ago. There's something about the quality of some of this music that transcends time and space and language. It's amazing that you can write something as timeless as that. Beethoven wrote timeless music. Mozart wrote timeless music. The problem with timeless music is that it doesn't give you the immediate access that pop music does. Pop music is dependent on you being able to access it immediately without putting too much thought into it. Okay? So the markers in pop music are very simple. And you immediately are drawn in because it sounds like other music that you've heard. That's what makes pop music work. Serious music or serious concert music that we're talking about in this class works differently. It runs at a much deeper intellectual level. It makes it much harder to access the music the first time you listen to it. If you don't even have to take all of the songs. I know I'm putting a lot of music in the listening, but if you took even 3 or 4 songs from each of the chapters, or even from the style periods, take your 5 favorite medieval songs, your 5 favorite Renaissance songs, and your 5 favorite Baroque songs, and stick them on your phone and listen to them, and go back to those and listen to them over and over. They will grow on you, and you will come to love them more and more with each listening. So the way Mozart works is that you listen to Mozart the first time, and you go, well, that was nice. And then you listen to it the second time, and you go, oh, that was not, oh, I don't remember hearing that the first time through. And on the 20th listening, you're still hearing things that you didn't hear the first time. That's serious music. Much more to offer, much deeper, and much harder to access for the normal person. So as musicians, I want you to grow in your appreciation of not good music, but of the best music that's ever been written. And so the music, even though there are tons of music that was written at this time, the times that we're studying, we're trying to hit some of the very best of the best. And it's worth your while to spend some time with it and get to be friends with it. It is music that this music impacts us today. And it's music that, if you let it, will impact you. So, madrigal and secular song in the 16th century. So we're talking 1500s. Remember the 1400s, we talked about the international style. The international style was this kind of amalgamation, all these countries kind of cross-pollinating. You had composers leaving their home countries, this Italian composer working in that French court, this French composer working in that German court. And over time, all of this kind of cross-cultural interchange led to the development of a big international style. Guillaume Dufay was the guy that we think of at kind of the peak of that. Guillaume Dufay looks like it's William Dufay, but it's Guillaume is Guillaume. Guillaume is the way it's pronounced. Guillaume Dufay was at the forefront of that. And when we think of the great 15th century composers writing in an international style, Dufay is the guy at the top of the list. At the same time he's writing, we've got the English that have come up with this English style. And it's this English style that sounds a lot like the stuff we have today. And the reason it does is because of the way they're stacking chords, and they're building chords, and and things that they're doing with harmonies and homophony and things of that nature. And of course, the guy at the top of the heap there, English style, is going to be a guy that's English, right? So the English style guy is who? Who's the guy we think of when number one guy writing in that English style? First name is John. Anybody remember? English style, John. Yeah, I've got, nobody says Dunst. That's very, very close. Dunstable, John Dunstable. Okay, good. So probably you wrote Dunst, you're writing Dunstable and you hit the send button. Right? Okay, so John Dunstable. So these guys are key figures. Now this is a 15th century. 16th century sees a return to nationalism. Back, we just had this anniversary of 9/11. We just had the 9/11 anniversary. And was it 19 years ago? And here, it's quite amazing. 19 years ago, 19 years ago to the day, which would have been 3 days after 9/11, everybody was an American. Everybody in America was an American. People were wearing American flags, running American, putting American flags out on their houses. God bless America. There was the unity in this country after 9/11. I mean, 9/11 was horrible, but the unity that followed, and the flow of people into church that followed was pretty incredible. But I've never in my whole life seen the country so united after a tragedy. It was Americanism. America was the topic, and it was really hard to find anybody that wasn't espousing American ideals and love for the country. And it's completely different now. I'm looking at what's going on with the rioting, and I'm wondering what has happened in 19 years, because it's the same country, but it's not even it hasn't even been a a generation. 19 years ago, all of my kids were born before 2000, before 9/11, 2001. So it's not like it was that long ago, but the country has just changed dramatically. I bring that up because we're in the middle of this change, a sea change, and it is going to impact music. Now, it impacts lots of other stuff. That's another conversation, other stuff that concerns me. But right now, we're talking about music, and and that's always been the case. Music is affected by what's happening in politics and arts and culture, and that's happening in the 16th century. So in the 16th century, we see a return to nationalism in music. Tell me what nationalism is.
Nationalism in music is music that's kind of culture-based, right? It's music that reveres that particular culture in that country.
Right. So nationalism is writing in a style that tries to that specifically tries to sound like it's coming from your country. Okay, so and that's an extension of the English style. The English style becomes the English style, not because there's anything about it that sounds English, but because Dunstable and his contemporaries start to write in a style that other people notice are coming from English composers. Then they say, oh, that's coming from English composers. That's that English style. And they put a label on it, And at that point, then the music that sounds like that does sound like the music that comes from England, because that's the music that comes from England. It's self-fulfilling. So nationalism is where you start to write in a style that's particularly tied to your own nationality. Now, by definition, stuff that's nationalistic is going to be in vernacular. So Italian nationalistic songs are going to be in Italian. English nationalistic songs are going to be in English. Spain, Spanish. French, France is French. I mean, it is. So that's the way it works. So the first thing is that it's in the vernacular. And the reason that's happening is because people are setting the songs or setting the poems of the poets of their country, which again it's a natural thing. Who is your favorite poet? Do you guys have any favorite poets?
Emily Dickinson.
Okay. And what nationality is Emily Dickinson?
She's English.
Yeah. And so why do you like Emily Dickinson?
I like the element of darkness and depth to her poetry. Like
Okay.
it's dark without being
Morbid?
yeah. There's really deep. It's not like all of her stuff is dark, but I just feel like there's a lot of depth overall to her poetry. Almost like she gives little bits of wisdom, like little
Okay.
wisdom in her writing as well. I don't know.
Okay, so cool. So Emily Dickinson writes in a way that resonates with you. And of course, part of that is dependent on the fact that you both speak the same language, correct? So Goethe is a German poet from the 19th century who was a brilliant poet. And he's the guy that wrote a lot of the texts for songs that, I mean, the Schubert set, the Schumann set, that all the German leader writers, composers set. And yet Goethe is not somebody, I don't know, maybe somebody in the class would say, yeah, I really like Goethe. Well, if you do, you have to like him you have to either be fluent in German or you have to like the translations. But the problem is that poetry doesn't translate well, does it? Right? Well, the thing that makes poetry work is not just the words, but how the words are, the order that the words are placed in, and the rhythm that the words are delivered as you're reading. So poets writing in their native tongue are going to be a source for the vernacular songs that undergird this kind of nationalism. In addition to that, a nationalism arises from amateur demand for poetry and music. And so naturally people who are less learned in the craft or the art of music need something that's more accessible. So again, now we're talking about pop music. Pop music is worldwide. But you're probably more likely, if you listen to pop music, you're probably more likely to listen to something on a local pop station than to listen to bootleg recordings of K-pop, right? So you know about K-pop, you've heard K-pop, but it probably doesn't resonate with you like Rihanna or whoever that you're listening to, in this, I don't know, who's popular right now?
I'd say, Ariana Grande.
Yeah, Ariana.
Okay.
And Billie Eilish.
Eilish.
Oh, yeah.
Good. I don't know.
Yeah. Boy, I can't get into her music yet.
Yeah,
So
it's fucking bad.
I'm still with the Delph. So that's where I am. I mean, I'm listening to Queen.
Woo-hoo!
So I'm an old guy. But anyway, so that music's very, very accessible. So and it's music that typically doesn't interest me because I'd rather hear something that has more guts to it, more meat. And it's not that pop music isn't fun and good or enjoyable. It's just not the stuff that interests me. I like deeper stuff. So so the amateur demand for music and poetry drives this, and because of that, and because of the different linguistic areas, and even within countries, like for instance Switzerland, we talked about this, has French, German, a little bit of Italian represented in Switzerland, and of course an English component in Switzerland too. So Switzerland has kind of 4 languages going on at the same time right now in that country. So naturally different forms are going to come out of that. The most important genre in the 16th century in this area, and we're talking about secular song, okay, the most important nationalistic secular song genre would be the villancico in Spain. That's Villancico, villancico. The frotola in Italy, Frottola. In France, it's the chanson, Chanson, except it's the new chanson. Old chanson is different than the new chanson. It's not, it's different enough that you need to realize that 16th century chanson is just like 16th century madrigals versus like 14th century madrigals. They're different forms. They just have the same names because it's a chanson means song. So French song in the 14th century is different than French song in the 16th century. Song is chanson in French, and it sounds so highfalutin when we say it. Well, that's a chanson. Just like German Lieder. Oh, yes, I'm a Lieder singer. All Lieder means is song. It's German song. So try not to get too taken up in these terms, but that's what these are called. Chanson is a very specific form, France, 16th century. In Italy, not only is the madrigal the most important song in Italy, it becomes the most significant genre anywhere. In the long run, madrigals continue for another century or two without wavering, certainly another century. So madrigals are very important, and I'll say the focus of this chapter. Madrigals are Italian, and they are so powerful in their influence that England imports the madrigal as a form and then comes up with its own version of English madrigals. And madrigal is such a descriptor that the English called their version madrigal. Okay? So madrigal is very important. Italy invents the form. Italy promotes the form, and Italy exports the form to England, and England adopts it as a second genre right next to its lute songs. And so in England we have madrigals and lute songs. And a lute song is exactly what it sounds like. It's for solo voice, somebody playing a lute, kind of like you're sitting in your dorm room and somebody brings in a guitar and somebody's strumming the guitar, and maybe you're singing a song you heard on the radio or that you heard in church. Okay, a lute song. It's just, think of it as like a song for solo voice and guitar, except in this case it's a lute. Lute and guitars are different, but they're related. They're first cousins. Okay, so let's see. Now, we talked a little bit about the madrigal. Madrigals, the Italian madrigal drives Italy, music in Italy, and Italian composers. And in Italy, madrigals are important for maybe 100 years after this. But what it does for Italy as a power in music is it makes Italy the most influential power in music over the next 2 centuries. okay, the 16th and 17th centuries. And out of Italy, we get things like symphonies. I mean, you wouldn't think of it, but that's all this stuff, symphonies and sonatas. And if you've ever asked yourself, why is everything on this page in Italian, right? Why are the tempos marked in Italian and the dynamics marked in Italian? And why is it says tutti, everybody comes in, and solo, and all the instrumental terms that you have, and your instructions for violinists. Why is all that stuff in Italian? Well, all that stuff's in Italian because of this. It's because madrigals drive Italy to become the world power in music for 2 centuries at a time when the stuff that we do today, symphonies and concertos and concert music, all that stuff is rooted in Italy. And Italy, if it had been in Germany, all the stuff on our music would be in German. If it had been in English, all the stuff on our music would have been in English. But it happened in Italy, so the international terms are Italian. Now, it's not in your book, but that's what happened. Okay, so that's, if you're ever wondering, it's because of the madrigal. All right, the first market for music. Any questions at this point? All right. When was the printing press invented? Okay, that's all right if you don't know it off the top of your head. Remember this date. You've heard me say this before. About every 500 years, an invention occurs that profoundly changes society, societal norms. Every 500 years. 1450 was one of those years. And it was the invention of the printing press. There is life before the printing press, and there is life after the printing press. It's not a coincidence that the Renaissance is 1450 to 1600. The Renaissance coincides with the printing press because the printing press makes the Renaissance possible. Does that make sense? Before the printing press, books were very expensive, and you could only find them in monasteries or, basically monasteries, areas of learning. After the printing press, and the average Joe on the street could buy a book for a relatively cheap amount. People had reason to read, mainly to read the Bible, and the printing press makes that possible because it makes books cheap. And of course, what book did everybody want to read? What was the first book? What was the first big book came off the printing press? Change, huh?
The Bible.
It's the Bible. It's the Bible. So in 1517, it's not a coincidence that the Reformation begins in 1517, and Luther does a translation of the Bible into German. The first time it happened, really first time it happened. And the reason why it was, I mean, that could be distributed. And the reason it happened was because people could read. There was a reason to do it. Until the printing press, there was no reason to print the Bible in German because nobody could read. Why would you do that? Nobody knew how to read German. I mean, just a handful of people could read German. And the average Joe on the street couldn't read because he couldn't afford a book. The books were, if you think the music history text is expensive, Bibles would have set you way back. It would have taken, a scribe 6 months of his life to copy one copy of the Bible. So they were very, very expensive. And so now you can print up a Bible pretty cheaply. And all of this stuff flows into the Renaissance. So you got the printing press. In 1501, you have Petrucci. Petrucci's out there with his music printing press doing the same thing to music that Gutenberg did with the Bible. Okay? So in 1501, printing press for music. And up to this time, music had been the realm of professional musicians and professional music centers. So there were specific centers in Europe, where music centers, where the professional musicians lived and they produced professional music. And those centers would have been either churches or courts. Not all churches and all courts, but specific churches and courts. So once Petrucci's over there in Venice and he's cranking out this stuff and he's making coin, he's selling this stuff right and left. He's having to do reprints because the demand is huge. What are you going to do if you have some free time? If you're working in an urban center as a shoemaker and you have some free time to kill, what are you going to do? Read, because there's no internet, there's no cell phones, there isn't even telephones. I mean, you could write a letter, but it'd take 3 weeks for somebody to get the letter who lived two towns over. Okay, so you could read, you could make music, maybe play some games. There weren't a whole lot of choices. So when music became available, it was another choice. It was another option. Things that I can do in my free time, things that I can do with other people, stuff that I can enjoy. Okay, so that's what's going on. And it happens to come because of the printing press. There's growing commerce that happens at the middle class level. Up to this point, you had the churchianity, you had the folks working in the church, you had folks that lived in the castles, and you had everybody else that was the have-nots, and their job was to try to survive by doing whatever they could to serve the church and the nobility. With the advent of the printing press and the start of the Renaissance, this middle class rises up because now people actually have trades that they're learning and commerce that's going on and trade that's happening between cities. And this stuff comes up and middle class people start to climb the ladder. And so they're looking for something to do in their free time. When notation was invented, it was done so for the church. Then as power shifted, as power was shared with nobility, that notation was transferred to the courts and was co-opted for court entertainment. And so the church and the courts controlled music. And then once Petrucci made it possible for anybody to get it, all of that spills out into the middle class. I've talked about God to monarchs to men. This is the very kind of pinpoint time in history where God to monarchs to men is shifting, is making that dramatic shift as power shifts from the church, is shared with the courts, and then eventually is demanded by the common person. Okay. Now, and that happens over a couple hundred years. Now we're talking about the 16th century. Here's something that's very interesting. If you were living in the courts at the time, okay, so think Romeo and Juliet, okay, living in their little city states, and Romeo is all decked out really nicely. Juliet is all decked out, and her hair is perfect. And Romeo and Juliet meet. They're warring factions. They come from two families, and they meet, and they basically meet at a party. And the party is the course of that party, of all these parties that are happening, is to get my marriageable daughter interested in your marriageable son. What else are we expecting of nobility at this point? We want them to look pretty, and because they own everything, we want them to look pretty and produce heirs, right? That's your two jobs as nobility. You don't have to work because you have servants working for you. You don't need the money because you already own everything. It's not a capitalist society, it's an agricultural holding land-based society. And so your wealth is determined by what land you own. And what you want is you already have 30,000 acres, and you want to get Joe's 20,000 acres over on his part of the country. And the way you do that is you get your daughter to marry Joe's son, right? Because it's passed down through the families. At this time, dance and music is what determines eligibility in the courts. So if you are a young maiden and you're trying to get hitched to the best prospect in the lands, you better be able to read music and sing, and you better be able to dance. And the reason why dance was important is because it showed how cultured you were, and it showed if you were in good physical shape. If you couldn't dance, you weren't in good physical shape, and if you weren't in good physical shape, you probably weren't the best choice to mate with to get that heir to pull these kingdoms together. So at the time, being able to sing a madrigal was the same thing as you going to school to find a mate. Not that any of you are at Calvary to find mates, but what ends up happening is that you go to Calvary and other people are at Calvary, you share these same values, and quite often, and you already know this, that people come to Calvary and they find their future life mates. It's natural that it would happen. Well, the same thing's happening at parties at this time in the Renaissance. So if you were attached to a court and you wanted to be considered marketable as a potential mate, you were expected to read music, play an instrument, and sing. And you also had to be able to dance. And somebody once said that the guy with the guitar gets the girl, okay? That was as true then as it is now. If you could dance, you were a hot commodity. As the printing press drives the availability of cheap books and music, it also drives literacy. People are reading, they're writing, they're doing music, they're learning instruments, and boom, we get the Renaissance. Okay, that is the marketplace for music. Let's keep going. Spain, the Villancico, late 15th century. You remember Ferdinand and Isabella. They're working to unify Spain as a world power. They're sending Cristobal Colombo over to the Americas to find a trade route with China. They find something different, but it still works out for them, works out for us. they and Ferdinand and Isabella intentionally push for the development of art that is Spanish. They say, we're Spanish, we want our art to be preeminent, and so all sorts of artworks are developed at this time, one of which is music, and out of that push to develop truly Spanish music, we get the villancico. It is rustic, pastoral, songs about nature, always songs about love. All of these have love components. So it might be a peasant girl or a shepherd girl and a shepherd boy, and they meet, and sparks fly. Popular subjects. These were strophic. What is the difference between strophic and through composed? Yeah, what's strophic? When I say a song is strophic.
Doesn't it repeat like the same patterns of music?
Yeah, it's verse form. A hymn is strophic. It's a set of music with multiple verses. The set of music, and the music keeps repeating, but the verses change each time you sing it. A mighty fortress is our God is strophic. Okay? In Christ alone is strophic. 3 verses or 4 verses to the same music. So if that's strophic, what is through composed?
Where it doesn't repeat the same melody.
That's it. So through composed music is music like it would be like if you're into Schubert, Gretchen am Spinnrad, or Erlkönig, both of those are through composed. They start. It's not that the music sounds similar all the way through, but the music changes as you go through the song. Okay, so the text is set to changing music instead of repeating music. Through composed versus strophic. And we're talking about song. We're talking specifically about poetry that's set to music. This doesn't apply to a sonata that has no words with it. We're talking about songs, where you actually have words. Okay, so these villancicos are strophic. They're syllabic. That means, as opposed to melismatic. So that means that they're, 1 or 2 syllables for each note, for each 1 or 2 notes. Okay, that's syllabic. And they're homophonic. What is homophonic?
It's like with soprano on top, correct?
Typically, yeah. Doesn't have to be, but typically.
Yeah.
And the voices move at the same time.
Right.
So homophonic music or homophonic music is a series. The voices are stacked and they move together. Okay, and so that's what so villancico sounds a lot like a hymn, except it's not hymn types of texts, but that's basically what it is. So, when you think strophic, think hymn-like or pop songs. Pop songs tend to be strophic with an occasional bridge. Okay, so oftentimes music is predominantly strophic or through composed. It can have elements of both, but when we say strophic, we mean the majority of the song is strophic. Okay, so these are simple songs. They're very authentic to the culture, Spanish culture, and since they're based on Spanish poets, and the Spanish poets were being encouraged to write about Spanish culture, obviously these songs became the epitome of Spanish culture. Example I have in your listening is Juan de la Encina, Hoy comamos y bebamos. Hoy Camamos y Babamos. Isn't that a great title? Okay, so at this point is where I would love to play that, and I can't. So maybe next week. But go back and listen to it. It's in your listening. Okay, in Italy, we talked about the frotola. The frotola is similar to the villancico. It's a tune set to poetry. There are some of the texts are salty, earthy, bawdy, talking about, they're like bar songs. Okay, so, and some of them were Advent songs and Christmas songs. So it was a form that they set their poetry to. So that's a frotola. And that's different than madrigal, but that's, but it's important to talk about frotola because that was going on at the same time as madrigals. Okay, let's talk about the Italian madrigal. Any questions at this point? Okay. Grace, could you look around the room and make sure everybody's awake?
I'm awake.
Good. Okay, Italian madrigal. Oh, I love madrigals. Okay, this is the most important genre in the Renaissance. Madrigals are fun. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have not sung madrigals, there's enough people in the room to sing madrigals. We should get some madrigals and we should sing them and you will fall in love with them. They were written specifically for young ladies and gentlemen to sit there after dinner, make googly eyes at each other, and sing and have a great time. That's why they were produced in the first place. They are fun. The lyrics are fun. They are text dependent. When they were setting these, they were setting the text to squeeze the most fun out of the text. Some madrigals are sad, but they're sad in the sense that you would go see a sad opera with gentlemen, would you ever take a girl you're dating to a sad movie?
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Well, we'll have to have a talk later. Ladies, would you ever want your potential suitors to take you to a sad chick flick? And all the ladies say yes, right?
I love chick flicks. Not a chick flick for me.
Okay, not a chick flick.
Movie.
Okay, but a sad movie. Why, ladies? Why do you want to go to the sad movie?
Because they're more meaningful.
Because they're more meaningful. And what does that say about the guy who takes you to the sad movie?
He's a good guy.
Wow. Gentlemen, are you listening to this?
And you'll get sad, and then he hugs you, and then you feel really good.
I feel like this.
Yes, you want to use, in the middle of the movie, you've got a Kleenex in your hand, ladies. You're dabbing your eyes, and what do? You're sitting on the right-hand side, and what do you do with your left hand? You put it over and hold his hand, right?
Right.
Gentlemen, we have to have a talk.
That's right.
The future of the human race is dependent on you understanding this. Oh.
Who knew we were
No.
dating, guys?
It depended on me liking chick flicks.
Toby says, my husband takes me to horror films, so I have to hold him. Okay. It was no different back then. They would sing sad flicks, and the women would look at the men and say, they're so sensitive. They will make great daddies for my children. Okay? They are so sensitive. I just want to hold his hand and I want to hug him. That's not necessarily what the guys are thinking, but it's the same thing that comes together. That's God has us wired this way. Okay, so this is the chance for you to show this special woman in your life how sensitive you are. Oh my goodness, guys. Yes, take them to sad films. Okay. Don't take them to the Marvel superhero movies. Your relationship will go nowhere. You might enjoy the movie.
It was kind of like this, though.
Are you kidding me?
You might enjoy the movie, but you want to go to the sad stuff, go to an opera. Go to a Puccini opera. Okay, you'll be married by next week.
Oh my God.
No, I won't.
Okay, you didn't know we were going to do this important stuff along with the music history, did you? Okay, so that's what's going on with madrigals. Highly text dependent, lots of Italian poetry, sonnets, love sonnets. My life is nothing without you, but if you are in my life can be everything I want it to be. I was just this morning watching the scene from Zeffirelli's. I wish I could pull it up and play it. They are in a court situation, Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. Olivia Hussey, 16 years old in this role, is the perfect Juliet. You can go online, go to YouTube, and go to the place where Romeo and Juliet meet for the first time at the kind of the dance after dinner at one of the courts. And the dialogue is to die for. Well, it is Shakespeare, but the Shakespearean dialogue is incredible. Okay. I just wanted to hug my wife, but she was with the grandkids, getting used to my granddaughter, and she wasn't here. So all I could do is just look at the screen and go, this is breathtaking. Romeo and Juliet. Great film, by the way, Zeffirelli.
Dr. Tom?
Tom.
Actually,
Why?
Tom.
No.
You're frozen.
You're frozen.
Your hair looks cute.
Thanks, I did it yesterday.
I like it.
Thank you.
Dr. Stolberg?
Hello.
Should we disconnect and then connect
I think
again?
you said,
The last time he
Oh.
froze, but we
He
didn't hear
froze.
sound.
Right.
I don't know if you can hear us.
I mean, it's almost time to go on break.
he'll probably get back on later. Right? Do we stay in and then he gets back on?
Well, we
So
both
he's-
stay on, we just leave the screen.
I think if we exit out, he'll know to contact us again.
Yeah.
Hang up?
Yeah.
I'm glad that Nobi said something.
Oh, there you are.
Hello?
Woo!
I'm back. What happened?
You froze.
Okay, I did freeze. I just went completely away.
You're
So,
also on screen.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we're back. I don't know what's going to happen with the video, but we'll see. It says it's still recording, so I'm going to assume it's going to be there. But that's why I run another recording here. I didn't lose my OBS connection, but I did lose Teams. So if we lose it, just hang out and I'll try to figure out what's going on. Okay, so here we go through the Italian madrigal. As I say, 14th century madrigal. Any resemblance is a name only. The typical madrigal is through composed, as opposed to being strophic. It's through composed. New music for every line, as opposed to the strophic. The themes are love and sex, wit and charm, and it's usually playful. It contains surprises and amusements. It's all for entertainment, usually 4 voices, sometimes 5 or 6. Remember, it's written specifically for court, after dinner entertainment for young people. It is a courting ritual that this comes from. That's how it starts. The early madrigal composers are like Jacques Arcadelt. That's the early mid 1500s. We have in the listening, you have Arcadelt's Il Bianco e Dolce Signo. That's down there in the listening. There was the poetry of Petrarch. So the Petrarchan movement, where the actual sounds of the words are affected and supported by the meaning of the text. So he was writing words. It was writing words for the sake of using. It's like we were talking about Emily Dickinson. Good poets will write words so the actual words coming out of your mouth have a certain flow and melody to them. Okay, so that would be Petrarch, and you can read more about that in the book. But the composers capitalized on Petrarch's poetry, and the goal was to suit the music to the words. And I have Adrian Willaert madrigal, Aspro Core e Salvaggio. So that's in your listening. Mid-16th century madrigalists. This is all in Italy. The madrigal kind of morphs as it goes through. 16th century 5-part voicings, alternating between homophonic and imitative textures. Cipriano de Rore is writing as the most important writer at this time. And I've got an example of his stuff, Dalle Belle Contrade, from Le Compagnia del Madrigale. And then women were involved at this time. Women were not so much composers. There were a few women that were composing. Women, though, were much more active in performing. And women, there were women, professional women singers at this time. The madrigals were for court entertainment. Both men and women sang them together and just for entertainment. But there were, like I say, a few women that were poets and more women that were professional singers. So Lucretia and Isabella Bendidio were sisters who sang court concerts. They got paid to go from court to court, singing court concerts. And most famous, and you'll hear about the Concerto delle Donne, the Concerto delle Donne, which means women's ensemble. And it was a group of trained women singers renowned for their skilled madrigal concerts. And so what they did was, the madrigals are on the rise and they're happening in the courts, but other people want to hear the madrigals. And so all of a sudden, the madrigal is elevated from court entertainment to being concert stage entertainment. So people started to come to hear madrigal concerts. Okay, and Concerto delle Donne would be one of the premier ensembles at the time. Lots written about them. Later madrigalists, again, we're talking about Italian madrigals. Luca Marenzio. Luca Marenzio is the last half of the 16th century. Again, very into contrasting feelings in the song, visual elements being represented by the music, and then something called text painting or madrigalisms. You'll hear both terms. Text painting is when you sing about a mountain. There's a piece by Monteverdi, and it goes, in the monti, di valle. And the line is, and the mountains and the valleys. The mountain and the song goes up, or the melody goes up, and the valleys and the tune goes down. That's a madrigalism, okay? That's text painting. And we aren't talking about Monteverdi yet, he's coming up, but he wrote tons of madrigals and did a lot of text painting. So madrigalisms is musical images for the evoking of literal text. And that is certainly on your term sheet. I have Marenzio's Solo e pensoso I più deserti campi down in your examples. All right, latter madrigalists. Carlo Gesualdo, pum pum pum. Carlo Gesualdo, Prince of Venosa. He was an aristocrat, and all he was interested in was writing, composing, and publishing madrigals, his music, most of which were madrigals. So he was a published composer, which was rare for the nobility. Remember, this guy's a prince. If you hear Gesualdo, oh, I wish I could put on a piece by Gesualdo. If you could hear a piece by Gesualdo, you would remark, that sounds like 20th century stuff, because he's almost atonal. he changes keys in the middle of a line and measure and goes in completely different directions. It is some of the most amazing, crazy stuff you're ever going to hear from any style period. But it's from a crazy guy. Gesualdo was crazy. So his music is very chromatic, full of lots of very sharp contrasts. It's dramatic changes in mood. Happy, really tragic, sad, upbeat, all happening in the same song between measures. Crazy stuff. Okay, almost 20th century sounding. Now, when you talk about Gesualdo, you need to know something, because you cannot talk about Gesualdo without bringing up his sordid past. Gesualdo was married a couple times. His first wife, he killed. And what happened was, his first wife, I believe it was his first wife. Yeah, because I think the second wife left him. But first wife was having an affair. He rushed in to the bedroom and he stabbed both her and her lover in bed and killed them. Then he ran back out, and the witnesses say he said, "Hey, I don't think they're dead enough yet." He said, "I don't think they're dead." And he ran back into the room and stabbed him some more. The next day, the local officials show up, and what they see is two corpses, horribly mutilated, still there in the bed where Gesualdo left them. And they talked to the witnesses, and they talked to Gesualdo, who, remember, was a prince, and they said, "No, we don't see that any crime was committed here." And Gesualdo got off. So he had a fascinating career, both musically and with his love life, and those aren't really separated. When you talk about Gesualdo, you're going to remember that this guy was a vicious, jealous murderer on top of everything else. So what we have is Sesto Libro di Madrigali 6. Io parto e non più dissi is the piece that I picked out in your book. It's in your book, and I plugged it in down there. But literally anything that Gesualdo writes, you can go back and listen to it. I've sung Gesualdo. It's crazy. It's crazy to sing. It is like your worst nightmare in terms of emotions. All emotions he was feeling, he was pouring out, just tremendous outpouring of emotions into his music. That's what makes it so cool. Very expressive. So now you should all run and listen to Gesualdo after the class, because it's well worth your time. Let's keep going, because we need to take a break here too. The Vianella, Canzonetta, and the Ballato, light and entertaining for social singing. These are all an extension of the form fixe. The Vianella's lively, strophic, homophonic, three-voice. Canzonetta, lively, homophonic, simple harmonies. Balletto, lively, strophic, homophonic, three-voice, simple harmonies for dancing and singing. The ballettos or the ballets, anything that says ballet or balletto, usually they were singing and dancing both. Okay, so the legacy of the madrigal, as the genre matured, it went from being a source of pleasure of the singers to being appropriate for concerts and theatrical performances. Those performances are still happening today. I used to direct a group here called Evidence, and there was a period of time we were doing madrigal dinner concerts at Christmas, where the group dressed up in Renaissance garb, sang Renaissance Christmas songs, and acted out some kind of Renaissance theater. So it's the same. It's still being done. And madrigals led directly, Italian madrigal led directly to the development of opera because the focus is on the text, the underlying support of the music to support the emotional aspects of the text. And that's where opera flows from. So think of madrigal as being pre-opera. And it also shows just how dramatic the humanistic imprint is on music at this time. It's about human. Okay, when we get back, I'm gonna take a brief, let's see, where are we? 3:40. Let's take a 15-minute break and we'll come back, finish up this stuff and try to get through chapter 12. I know I spent a lot of time on it, but this is great music. It's worth it. 255. 15 minutes, 255.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody back?
Well,
Yes.
not Ashley, but I think she only stays for half of it and then watches the other half.
Okay, good.
By the way, Dr. Stolberg, I'll watch the first half.
Okay. No problem. Did you get your car sorted out?
Unfortunately, no.
Uh-oh.
Long story.
Yeah, I remember cars in college. Never fun, never good information. But
You ever own a Mercedes?
a Mercedes?
Yeah.
Mercedes are very expensive.
Welcome to my world.
Very expensive to maintain.
Yeah.
When they break, what they do is they, if it's $200 for a set of brakes on a regular car, it's $800 on a Mercedes. If it's $200 if it's $150 for an alternator, it's $600 on a Mercedes. They're just horrible. So,
Yep.
what Mercedes do you have?
It's an E320, 2003.
Okay, so they just gave you the quote, huh?
Well, yeah. I'd rather not talk about it. It's a long
Yeah.
story.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. It's I can tell you that all the girls in the room are feeling sorry for you now. It's a sad tale indeed.
Don't
We were talking about sad movies.
at all.
All the guys are crushed. They're thinking, "Oh no, I gotta sit through a sad movie." So
Yeah.
I know what all the guys are thinking. So, like, please don't make me go to that movie. But that's all right, gals. You know they really are interested in you if they're willing to go with you to those movies. Okay, let's get started. Enough of that, huh? France. I mentioned that chanson, French chanson. It's a new type of chanson. It's different than 14th century chanson. They're light, fast, they're rhythmic, four voice, fun, amorous themes, and sometimes risque. That's what you need to know about French. They're syllabic, duple meter. The melody is in the top voice. They're homophonic. They're a lot of fun to sing. They're perfect for amateurs. I've got Tant que Vivre down in the bottom you can listen to. And then the later Franco-Flemish chanson. It's northern France. They're more traditional. They were more like old style chanson, varied in style. They're light, humorous, bawdy, but they could also be somber and serious. I'm just going to rush through some of this because you can read about it. Text depiction is very important in all of these. And I have an Orlando Lassus recording down there in the listening. Musique mesurée, measured music. Should be in your term list. It's an attempt to imitate the rhythm of Greek poetry. I love words like musique mesurée because it's the type of words I love to put on exams. So, attempt to imitate the rhythm of Greek poetry. When I talk in English, I stress certain sounds. I don't stress certain sounds. I elongate certain sounds. I shorten certain sounds. That's the cadence of English. The cadence of English is similar to the cadence of German language. The French don't do that. The French language is a series of sounds, all more or less even in length and with no stress. So when the French talk, they talk like this, and they spins out of the mouth, it goes like this, blah, 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 blah. That's how French, that's the French cadence of speech, okay? So the French the French language doesn't have the kinds of stresses and accents that the Italians have. Okay, the Italians, they talk like this, and every penultimate syllable is emphasized. And so when you look at an Italian you know, Amarili mia bella, non credo del mio cor, because you sung Amarili probably. And there's stresses and non-stresses, stress and unaccented. And so it makes it perfect for setting text in music. The French don't have that. And so the French tried to figure out some way to get their music settable like the Italians and the English and the Germans were doing. So they come up with this thing called musique mesurée. And what it does is it takes the Greek idea of certain tones are elongated and certain are shortened, and they apply that to their French chanson. The one that I picked out is Claude Lejeune, Rêve venir du printemps, which is basically, you know, the reveling in the spring, basically. A fun song, great song to sing, still popular in certain circles today in choirs. I tried to find one where they actually took it fast enough, but that's down in the listing. Very cool. Germany, varied styles. Germans were, I think, less into some of the stuff that was happening in Italy and France. I was going to say less sophisticated, but that's not fair. They did unaccompanied songs, and it was monophony, basically, just an unaccompanied song. And remember we had the Minnesingers from 100 years previous, from like the troubadours and trouvères in France, and then we had the Minnesingers in Germany. Well, now we have the Meister, and those were all kind of noble people that were going around, and they thought, hey, it would be really cool to go around and write songs and sing them in different villages. I mean, that's kind of the fad, is what happened. The troubadours, trouvères, kind of like a pop musician, a rock musician today, going from club to club. Okay, so that's kind of what they were doing. Because of the rise of the middle class, we get these merchants. There were urban centers, so there were people like the butcher and the shoemaker and maybe a lawyer, and then artisans, people that were making stained glass for the church, or they were making furniture for the home, and they did their trades, and in their spare time would join composer guilds of amateur composers, and they were called Meistersingers, master singers, master singer, Meistersinger. That's the German. Hans Sachs is the most famous Meistersinger. He's kind of ran for most of the 1500s, 1494 to 1576. He was a shoemaker by trade. He wrote thousands of songs. He was the Der Meistersinger von Nuremberg. The Wagner opera, comic opera, is about Hans Sachs. That's this guy. So if you're into Wagner operas, Meistersinger by Wagner is about Hans Sachs. Comedy but heavy Wagner music. But the one I included is Itzhak's Innsbruck, Ich muss dich lassen. And really pretty song, and typical German song, German leader, basically. England, okay, we talked about England a little bit at the beginning. English secular music is an important genre of this time. Henry VIII and his wife, Anne Boleyn, which is his second wife, were both musicians. They wrote concert. They wrote, and so did a lot of other people, write consort songs. A consort song is a consort is an instrumental term for a group of instruments. So a consort of viols is a collection of viols in different sizes. So instruments back then, and we'll talk a little bit about instruments today, but instruments back then came in families of instruments. So you would have a family of lutes or a family of viols or a family of sackbuts. And each of these families of instruments had different sized instruments in it, all the same type of instrument, but different sizes, so they could play high, medium, and low parts of the music. And those collections of instruments, families of instruments, were called consort. So consort of viols or viols, consort of viols would have been a collection of what looked like violins, 4 violins of different sizes. They weren't really violins, because violins were emerging at this time too. Okay, so William Byrd wrote a bunch of consort songs, and they kind of went hand in hand with lute songs, but we'll talk a little more about lute songs here in a second. The English madrigals. What happened was, you weren't alive in the 60s with the Beatles, but when the Beatles came over from England, I think it was 1963, and they performed on the Ed Sullivan Show, there was massive, they called it Beatlemania. And everything Beatles and everything English became very important in pop culture in America. So whatever the Beatles did, the youth of America followed. They had a huge impact on culture in the United States, and really drove a lot of what happened in the 60s. That's kind of what happened in England with Italy. Italy was on the rise as a musical power. The madrigals were really cool. The English loved the madrigals. The English were doing the same thing with madrigals that the Italians were doing. They were using them in courts and for different events. Everything Italian they were into. It shouldn't surprise us that Shakespeare writes Romeo and Juliet and sets it in Italy, right? So so Italian culture was in vogue. They loved Italian madrigals, and several collections of Italian madrigals were actually published in England with English words. Remember, Italian doesn't translate well, and so the English finally decided that they were going to write their own madrigals, and they did. So they even called them madrigals. So you're going to come up with, so at the same time all these Italian madrigals are going on, English, shortly after that, the English start to write also. Most prolific English composer would have been Thomas Morley. He wrote madrigals, he wrote canzonets and ballats, which are the Italian, it's the English versions of the Italian canzonetta and the ballato. Remember I told you if you see ballat or ballato, that's a singing and dancing. I've got Thomas Morley's My Bonnie Lass, She Smileth down there in the listening. Also I have Thomas Weelkes, also a madrigal writer. This is probably the most famous. Whenever you take a music appreciation class or music history class, at some point, somebody's going to play Asbesta was from Latmos Hill Descending. If you do anything with when you do your listening, this is one that you should do. Asbesta was from Latmos Hill Descending. It is in English. It is an excellent example of word painting. They talk about going up a hill. They talk about coming down a hill. Music portrays it. It says that they go by 2 by 2, 2 people sing. They go 3 by 3, 3 people sing. And then all of a sudden, all the voices cut out, and one voice says, and then all alone. It's very cool. It's fun, clever, very typical of the madrigals of this time. So make sure you listen to Asbesta. Also going on, lute songs. We talked about that. Not as important as madrigals, but very important. Lute songs, also called airs, early 1600s. A lute song is a solo song with accompaniment, lute accompaniment. And the leading composers, it looks like John Dowland, D-O-W-L-A-N-D. The book makes the point that it's pronounced Doland, John Doland, and but everybody says Dowland. So for what it's worth, when you hear somebody talk about Dowland, they're going to say Dowland. but you know and I know the actual pronunciation is Doland. So he's 1563 to 1626, actually takes us into the Baroque. I have two collections of Doland's music. I love John Doland, and I have, as an example, I have "Flow My Tears," beautiful lute song, just tear you up. Ladies, here's a sad song for you: "Flow My Tears," John Doland. Guys, if you want to win the ladies' hand, sing Doland in your voice lessons. So everybody will think you're wonderful and sensitive. We all know you aren't, but everybody will think that if you sing the song. Okay. Let's see, I mentioned Campion. These songs are much more serious and personal than the madrigals. Madrigals were light entertainment. The lute songs were more really digging into human emotions. Very lovely pieces of music. Very beautiful pieces of music. There's a lot less text painting in the lute songs because it isn't about painting the text. It's about emoting. It's about coming up with emotions. And "Flow My Tears," oh my, it's such a sad piece. Very cool song. The lute part on these lute songs is in tablature. Tablature is like guitar chords, if you're in praise band and Jeremy prints up, you might get a lead sheet, which is the melody and chords above it. You might get a vocal part, which are 2 or 3 parts or 4 parts written out in the voicings. If you're a guitarist, you say, just give me the chord chart or give me the tablature. Okay, tabs. We refer to them as tabs. Just give me the tabs. Okay, but that comes from tablature. It's actually chord chart. And tablature is a layout of the actual fingerings, and it shows you where to put your fingers on the instrument. So this music is in tablature form, but there's lots of transcriptions of it into very playable pieces, transcribed for keyboard and other instruments. Okay, to recap, we're going to finish up chapter 11. Madrigals and secular songs from other countries reflected the rising move towards humanism in its efforts to highlight the underlying meaning of the text and the subject matter of those texts. And that is love, rustic themes, fun and bawdy songs, social forms of entertainment. Number 2, the popularity of madrigals led to the dominance of Italy in all music well into the Baroque. Matter of fact, the Italians lead in opera, symphony, and a number of other forms. Number 3, the emphasis on the dramatic aspect of madrigal texts were a direct influence on the development of opera. Number 4, the popularity of these songs continue to this day. School choirs are still singing madrigals. Madrigal groups specific from the Just Do Madrigals are still in schools. Evidence used to do madrigal dinners. Illinois State University, where I did my undergraduate degree, has a massive set of madrigal dinner performances at Christmas every year. They charge for it. They pay the singers. It's a huge thing in Illinois. For singers, this is the oldest music that many people have performed. So when you're dealing with choirs, junior high or senior high choirs, or people who've been in choir, for those of you who've been in choirs, you have probably sung a madrigal at some point. And that is probably the oldest music you've sung, unless you did O Magnum Mysterium. But that's kind of the same time frame. 1,000, and here's very cool. If you decide to go on for a master's and then a doctorate and become a researcher in music, there are thousands and thousands of madrigals that have no existing modern editions, and they have never been recorded. It's a wide open field of study. So there are many more madrigals that we don't know of that are out there for discovering than we do know of. That's cool, because madrigals are neat, and it's neat to know that there's this whole collection of songs that still need to see 21st century eyes. Okay, here's your essay question for the week. How did the music printing press impact 16th century music making? How did the music printing press impact 16th century music making? I could have put just music, but 16th century music and music making, I'll say that. How did the music printing press impact 16th century music and music making? I'll clarify it. Okay, that's your essay question. That you don't need to read the book. All you have to do is write about what we've talked about today. Okay, let's continue. Any questions on chapter 11? Very cool music in the listening. I gave you a bunch. I hope you listened to most or all of it. All right, we are going to zip through the rise of instrumental music, chapter 12. This is important because up to this point, instruments weren't where things were happening, okay? So up to this point, we've concentrated on vocal music because there isn't a lot to concentrate on with instrumental music. Instrumental music was there. It was for dancing. It was for ambient music during dinner. If you're having a big dinner and everybody's coming over for dinner, there'd be somebody in the corner playing something, probably ad-libbing it. It's like the guy at the piano at the restaurant playing over in the corner. But music was functional. It wasn't being written just for its own sake. As I say, music was usually learned by rote. Somebody would hear it or teach it to you, or it was just improvised on the spot. It really wasn't being written down. Though sometimes instruments were used to double the voices in choral music, in choral writing, so you might see it there. But instrumentation, the actual instruments used for that weren't important. So if you had a mass setting and you were in a church, you might have instruments playing with the singers as the mass is going on, but it wouldn't matter what the instruments are. Whatever instruments worked for that particular line, that's what they'd use. So it wasn't, the actual instrumentation was of no consequence. With the advent of music printing, more people were learning to read music, sing, and play instruments. And as they learned to play instruments, there was a demand that grew from music for that particular instrument. So composers started to take advantage of that and write for specific instruments. First for just instruments in general, then specific instruments. But understand that you write differently for a viol, which might have 3 strings on it. You write differently for that than you would a keyboard, like an organ or a virginal, or one of the other keyboards, clavichord. You write differently for those because you can do multiple notes at the same time. So on instruments, so there were certain aspects of certain instruments where you could exploit what that instrument was doing, and we just start to see writing for specific instruments start to emerge at this time. It becomes a major theme in the Baroque. That's called idiomatic instrumental writing, a major theme of the Baroque, but it's rooted right here at this time. Most of the instrumental families were called consorts. We've talked about that. Unique instrumental compositions. And these are names that carry over into the Baroque, so it's worth mentioning. But at this time, they started to call instrumental compositions specifically instrumental names. Variations, prelude, fantasia, toccata, ricercare, canzona, sonata. Those are all instrumental forms. okay, or instrumental types. They're really not a form. They're more just names for instrumental pieces. Let's see. Oh, the Renaissance kept the designations for haut and bas. So high and low is what those translate to, but that's not what they mean. They mean loud and soft. So they continued with the loud and soft designations from the medieval, if you remember that. I hope you remember that. I'm talking about instruments previously. Most of the medieval instruments survived, and then there were some new ones, new instruments. Sackbut, S-A-C-K-B-U-T, sackbut, is an early trombone. What a great name for an instrument. Somebody actually came up with that, sackbut. And it's when you see it, it's, oh yeah, that's a trombone. Not quite, but that's basically what it is. And then a crumhorn, C-R-U-M-H-O-R-N. A crumhorn is a double reed. You don't touch the reed. The double, you have a cup that you blow into, and the double reed is beyond the cup. So it's not like an oboe where you actually put your mouth on the reed. You blow into a cup, and the reed is farther down in the mouthpiece. And a crumhorn sounds a lot like a bagpipe. When you hear it, you go, yeah, that sounds like, it's got a real harsh kind of cutting sound to it. So sackbut sounds like kind of like a high trombone, a low trumpet. A crumhorn has that real snarly sound to it. Most popular for the home is a lute, just like guitar today. Most popular instrument at the time was the lute. The viol, or the viola da gamba, was the leading boat instrument of the time. It was like the viol was like you set it on between your legs and play it, not like a cello. It's not big enough. It's not really that big, but you set it on a leg or in your lap, and you play it it's more like a viola, like a larger violin, or a small cello is probably a better descriptor. Early violins appeared at this time. Keyboard instruments, clavichord. We talked, I think, a little bit about clavichord, but a clavichord is for small rooms, doesn't make a lot of sound. There's a string, and the hammer comes down and lands on the string and stays there. And where that hammer lands determines the length of the string and the pitch. So they're very, very soft, but they're pretty sounding. Wasn't good for concerts, but fine for your living room, your entertaining room. And then there was the harpsichord. Harpsichord then is like a harpsichord. A current modern harpsichord is not changed. Harpsichord has a quill, like a peacock or a turkey quill that's been cut so that it can catch a string. And the way a harpsichord works is when you hit the hammer, the quill pulls the string and plucks it. So that's why a harpsichord has that kind of sound that sounds like it's being plucked, because it is. So a harpsichord is a plucked instrument. The English harpsichord was called a virginal. The French harpsichord was called a clavecin, and the Italian harpsichord was called a clavicimbalo or clavicimbalo. And these instruments, don't think of these as inferior instruments to the 20th century. These instruments were highly refined and well made, and they had a very particular sound. In most cases, we don't use these today, or they've been replaced by other instruments, but very highly refined. And the music that was written at the time was written for these instruments. And so you'll often hear people record on some of these original instruments or on accurate reproductions, because the performances on the instruments it was written for are some of the best performances. They will sound a little out of tune to our ears because they used a different tuning system, but that's not because it's poorly made, it's because of the different system of tuning. So just a note there. Try to catch some performances on original instruments. It really breathes new life into some of this music. Types of instrumental music. It was printed for both amateurs and professionals, and it made it possible, of course, because of the printing press, for all of this. Another thing about the printing press, for the instrumental music to be widely distributed. There are 5 broad categories of Renaissance instrumental music: dance music, arrangements of vocal music, and this, of course, is in your book, settings of existing melodies, variations, and abstract instrumental works. I'm going to touch on some of these, not get too much into it so I can get through it. Dance music, obviously, is highly valued in the courts. As I said before, you were expected to be able to dance and sing and read music, and being able to dance was a sign of proper breeding. It was a way to meet people. The dancing was a way to meet people, and a way of sizing up a potential mate for their fitness and social skills. 2 purposes were to accompany the dancing, and also in the courts they used it for concert pieces. So they would actually sometimes retire to another room, and there would be a group of instrumentalists who would actually play music just for the sheer joy of entertaining. Let's see. Okay, what I have in the listening is bassa dance, low dance, which was like a stately couples, very elegant stately couples dance. Dances were often paired. So there's, I've got a pavane paired with a galliard by Sasato, also in the listening. And that when you had dance pairs, they were dances of like one might be slow and in duple meter, and the other one would be fast and triple meter, and they paired well together. So you would dance the first dance and immediately go into the second dance, and that was expected. It was kind of this shift in emotion. Arrangements of vocal music, another instrumental. I just mentioned that before, but they would take instrumental music was also, they would take existing vocal music and do a specific arrangement for an instrument for that based on that music. So lutenists and keyboard players were really big on this stuff. And I've got Josquin did that, Mille Regret, and I've got an instrumental transcription down there by Narvaez. Then there were settings of existing melodies, like chanson and other melodies. People would sing these melodies, they'd get to know the melodies, they'd get to love the melodies, and so there were instrumental versions of these for concerts and things like that. And then it would also be used in the church, so the organ might play a verse of a hymn, and then the choir would sing a verse of the hymn, and the organ would play, and then the choir would play, and the organ part was embellished. And and I've got the Kyrie from Missa Apostolorum down there by Cavazzoni. And then the Lutheran churches were doing basically the same thing, but they were doing something called organ chorales, which was the organ embellishing on a hymn tune. Variations, writing variations on a theme, either an existing theme or a newly composed theme. And the intent was to demonstrate how crazy they could get in their variations. And it was a way of showing expertise in the on the instrument. Ostinato is in your reading. I may have put that in the term sheet. Ostinato is a short repeating bass line that they would improvise over. So, yeah, we can talk more about that later. Let's get through this. Abstract instrumental works. Then there were pieces written without being tied specifically to dances or church music or transcriptions of popular music. They were just written as absolute music. Instrumental music written for the sake of the music. Just starting to emerge at this point, becomes big business in the Baroque period. But the start is here. And I've got the piece by Martini, La Martinella. And then there's other, you know, things written just for the keyboard to show off the keyboard or the organ. Maybe it's an opening song for church service on the organ, specific pieces. And these introductory pieces have names like Prelude, Fantasia, stuff like Toccata, Ricercar, all those are names given to these pieces. Toccata is what you're going to hear a lot of in the Baroque. Toccatas get their start here. Toccata means to touch, toccata, and would eventually become the chief type of composition in the Renaissance. And like I say, big stuff in the Baroque. And I have a Claudio Merullo Toccata Quarta del Sesto Tono. And music in Venice. There's a lot going on in Venice at the time. Petrucci's printing his music, and this can feed into your essay. Petrucci's printing his music and distributing his music from Venice. Remember that Venice is right there. It's surrounded by water, and it's a direct, it was a shipping mecca, so you could ship from, it was a great place to ship from and ship to, and then distribute from Venice. And it was also a big vacation spot. People like going to Venice because it was a cool place to be. I've been to Venice. It is a cool place to be. And so it's very cool. And so between the commerce and the tourism, it's not a surprise that Venice becomes a center for music in Italy. And again, in the medieval and Renaissance, there is Venice is already important. And by the time we get to the 1600s, 17th century, and the birth of opera, it actually happens in Venice, and driven by the fact that people come and visit. So what a great place. If I'm going to be a music publisher, I may as well publish my music in Venice and send it out from there, because I have ready access to ships, so I can send it to different countries. So let's talk a little bit about Venice. Second in importance only to Rome. That's where the Vatican is. Venice was an independent city-state. It was run by its own, by a collection of families. There were a few small families that basically ran Venice, and they would elect somebody called the Doge. The Doge is Italian for Duke, and so it was Duke of whatever, the Duke of Venice, but Duke, whatever the guy's name was at the time. It was the chief port of trade with the East. So if you're going to trade with Turkey or farther, you were going to trade out of Venice because it was the best port for that. And the Venetians spent megabucks on entertainment and the arts. In Venice is the Church of St. Mark. St. Mark is a huge church, beautiful church that would have been controlled at the time by the Doge and not the church proper. So it was a church that belonged to Venice instead of the Catholic Church. It's opulently decorated, still is opulently decorated, and to get the job of choir master at St. Mark's was getting the premier music position in all of Italy. So Italy is a rising power, becomes the number one musical power. The number one musical power position in Italy is the choir master at St. Mark's. So they're attracting the greatest musicians of the time. The most important of those would be Giovanni Gabrieli. Giovanni Gabrieli works at St. Mark's for 30 years. He's the organist, he's a composer, he supervises the staff of instrumentalists, and he had substantial resources there. So he writes pieces for multiple choirs and large instrumental ensembles. It's not that it hadn't been done before, but Gabrieli was doing it all the time because they had all these people on staff. So he regularly wrote polychoral motets. You'll see that in your term sheet. Polychoral motets. It's for 2 or more choirs, sometimes up to 5 choirs. And what would happen is they would space the instrumentalists out in the church, the choirs out in the church, and take advantage of the acoustics, which are incredible. And the choirs, so he was writing with the idea of the reverb and acoustics that were going on. He had that sound, he knew what it sounded like, and was writing these pieces specifically for St. Mark's. And he applied the techniques that he used for the music, he applied to his instrumental pieces too. Now I've got Gabriele's Sacra Sinfonia Canzon Septimi Toni a Acta down there in the listening. St. Mark's looks like a lot of cathedrals in Europe. When they built the cathedrals, they built the cathedrals so that if you were looking down, the cathedrals would look like a cross. So from God's point of view, God's looking down through the ceiling onto this is from God's point of view, looking down onto the church. It would be in the shape of a cross, and there'd be an altar here. And this was a little place back there where the priest might do his thing. These were, you might have choirs or some maybe some kind of shrines over here, and then the people would sit here. Okay, so Gabriele would take advantage of this arrangement, and he might put a choir here, and then he might put a choir here, and then he might put a choir here, and the director might sing here or stand here, and they would sing and alternate parts within the piece. So sometimes this choir singing, sometimes this choir singing, sometimes they're all singing. And he did this with up to 5 choirs. Now, I actually had probably the most profound musical experience of my life was when I sang a piece by Gabriele in St. Mark's in a multi-choir setup. So as part of a touring choir, university touring choir, and we did some music by Gabriele specifically because we knew we were going to sing in St. Mark's. And we set the music up for the concert as Gabriele would have set it up. And when you hear the music the way Gabriele had intended in the space that he had arranged it for, it is breathtaking. It was unbelievable. I can't even describe it except for here's this music coming at us. We're singing, other choirs are answering, and this music is just kind of spinning in the church and wafting up through the very high ceilings. And all of a sudden, I understood Gabriele. There was an attempt back in the 70s. They had something called quadraphonic sound. They were doing recordings where they had 4, instead of stereo, which is two speakers, they had 4 speakers, so that you had not only separation this way in the sound, but you had separation front and back. So you could take a sound and move it within instead of one-dimensional, but a 2-dimensional space, anywhere within that space. And there was an attempt to create the sonic sensations of a Gabriele music from St. Mark's. Sort of successful. But if you have a chance at some point in your lives, if you can get to St. Mark's and hear Gabriele's music performed in St. Mark's, it's unbelievable. So it's lost when you hear it, but I do have a Gabriele piece, and they got the guys separated so that they're playing across from each other. It's still pretty cool, but try to hear it in St. Mark's someday. So instrumental music, here's a recap and a final or an overview of this. Instrumental music gains independence. That's the title of this paragraph. So the 16th century, instrumental music was being cultivated for its own sake. It's important because it becomes one of the two main themes of the Baroque. Number two, abstract types of compositions rose in importance, eventually leading to the sonatas and symphonies of later centuries. Number three, some 16th century music continued into the Baroque. Toccatas, fantasias, and madrigals. Okay, but well, that's not instrumental. But some 16th century instrumental music continues into the Baroque. Much instrumental. Number four, much instrumental music was published during this period. Number five, Gabrieli's music is some of the earliest instrumental music that you will still hear today, just like madrigals. Gabrieli's music is very accessible. Number six, the resurgence of this music in the 20th century was joined with the reconstruction of Renaissance instruments used to perform them. So in the 20th century, early 20th century, there was a move to reconstruct these old Renaissance instruments. And they did that, and then they performed Gabrieli and other composers to hear how they should actually sound. Number seven, there is even more instrumental music of this period that has gone unexplored than the vocal music. There is a ton of Renaissance instrumental music that has not seen the light of day for the last 500 years or 400 years. That is incredible. So if you wanted to go major and do a doctorate in musicology, lots and lots of opportunities there for you. Okay, that is chapter 12. Chapter 13, we'll start with that next week, but I do want to give you, in the remaining few minutes, I want to give you a preview of the Baroque period. Baroque period, 1600 to 1750. This is what we're going to be talking about for the next three classes. The Baroque music is music that's full of action and movement. It's a music that exploits the materials available to it, just like the rest of art in the Baroque. The Baroque is, and we'll talk about the meaning of the word Baroque next week, but Baroque is ostentatious. It's bigger than life. Some people say it's gaudy, it's overdone, some people say. But it's just, it is no holds barred, take advantage of everything at your resource, all the resources that you have. That's the Baroque. The power at this time is shifting from the church to the aristocracy, and the aristocracy ends up having absolute power. So we're still seeing a move from God to monarchs to men. The Baroque is the peak of monarchs. This is the age of monarchs. There's a rising middle class, but there's still people who are barely surviving during the Baroque. Science, we get Galileo and Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. The two big composers of the Baroque is Handel and Bach. Now there's other composers in the Baroque. There's Monteverdi and Purcell, Corelli and Vivaldi, but they're not minor composers. But what you think of when you think of Baroque is Handel and Bach. So much so, when I took a graduate course in the Baroque, the course name was Bach and Handel. That was the name of the course. It was about the Baroque, but they called it Bach and Handel. So, and we're going to try not to, we will talk about Bach and Handel, but we're also going to try to talk about some of these other guys. There were two main musical thrusts. Absolutely, this will be on an exam at some point. The two big musical thrusts of the Baroque period is opera and idiomatic instrumental writing. That is, writing to the specific qualities of a specific instrument. Writing organ music for the organ. Writing string quartet music for string quartet. Well, writing a concerto grossi for certain instrumental groups. Writing violin music specifically for violinists. So that's what's going on there. Idiomatic instrumental writing, idiomatic instrumental music, and opera. That's the two biggies. Church, at this time, church gives way from the church modes to major and minor. It had already started in the Renaissance, but now major and minor dominate. So you get very little church mode stuff, and major and minor settle in to be the way music is composed. Music is both homophonic and polyphonic, often changing back and forth within the same piece, and violins come into their own. This is the age of the instrument making, where the instruments are so well made that today they still command the highest prices. A violin from this period is worth a lot more than a violin that's made today. And many consider the violins of this period to be the best violins made. Now there's actually 21st century is producing some pretty incredible instruments. Okay, characteristics of the Baroque, words that we're going to end up talking about. There was something called Affectenlehre, the doctrine of affections. This is different than the doctrine of ethos, but it does have to do with mood. Affectenlehre is the doctrine that says every piece should only have one mood or one emotion. So if it's a happy piece, it's happy from beginning to end. If it's a sad piece, it's sad from beginning to end. If it's a pensive piece or a relaxed piece, that is the piece, called Doctrine of Affections. We'll talk more about it. Okay, there's continuity of repetition of rhythmic patterns. So rhythm and melody is about setting up patterns and repeating those patterns. Melody, here's another word, and of course it's German because a bunch of Germans are writing this stuff. Fortspinnung. Fortspinnung means basically fourth spinning. And it's the idea that melodies unfold over time. So when you hear Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, at one that we hear it at Halloween time, and you hear ba-da-da, ba-da-da-da-dum, dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-da, and it goes back and forth, da 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 da, and then you get bum 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 bum. That's the melody, and the melody goes on forever. That's this unfolding melody. It's not like the nice, neat little 4-bar phrases we're used to today. The melody spins out over this long period of time, and it becomes important because that becomes the basis for fugues. Dynamics are terraced, so it's not so much crescendi and decrescendi. It's this section is in pianissimo, and then this section is mezzo forte, and then this section is mezzo piano, and this section is forte. Sections are terraced. Dynamics are terraced. The texture, like I say, is homophonic and polyphonic, but it's basically polyphonic. So if you said, what is the dominant texture in the Baroque period, it would be polyphonic music. We see the rise of chords, writing chords, going to major and minor keys allow us to go to chords, and then we get basso continuo, which is we'll talk about that some. We'll talk about that later. Baroque was about the exploration of contrasts and contrasting sounds. So the Baroque was about contrasting dynamic levels, contrasting ensemble sizes, contrasting sounds. It was about contrast. Music in the Baroque, it's written to order. That is, it was being written because somebody said, I want you to write this. There was demand for new music. So much so that existing music was kind of shunned. People didn't want stuff that had already been written. Everybody wanted new music, and they were willing to pay for it. The music director of any court or church or organization was highly paid, overworked, but was still a servant and had to ask permission to change jobs or go on vacation. Bach actually at one point wants to change jobs. He goes to his employer and says, can I change jobs? And actually goes to the employer and says, I'm going to change jobs. And the employer throws him in jail. And Bach spends a week or so in jail because he wants to change jobs. So that's how people were treated. Church music becomes more grand, along with the buildings becoming more grand and the paintings becoming more grand. Everything gets blown up bigger than life. And then there's a rise of the concerto grosso in ritornello forms. Again, we'll talk about this. Concerto grosso is about contrast. A concerto grosso is a small group of players versus a big group of players. So you have a small group of people that are playing, alternating with a big group of people that are playing. And it goes back to that very soft versus very loud, and again, the contrast. We get the emergence of forms that have multiple movements. Again, that comes from the dance music. Since there might be a suite of dances, now we're getting pieces that have multiple movements in single pieces, which of course is a rise of the symphony. And then there's the ritornello form. Ritornello is an alternation between tutti sections and solo sections. So you have an instrumentalist playing, and then you have a group playing, and then you have an instrumentalist playing, and you have a group playing. Again, it's about contrasts. Okay, so that is the opening to the Baroque period. Again, we'll start with chapter 13 next week, but I do have two pieces for you to listen to at chapter 13. So you're listening, chapter 11, chapter 12, chapter 13, two pieces from each period, and your essay, how did the music printing press impact 16th century music and music making? Any questions? Grace.
Is there a time, a particular time that you think you might post the listening assignments?
Yep, today.
Today, okay.
I'll go to, the first thing I'm going to do is post the video so people can watch the video. And then shortly after that, I'll try to get all the terms and listening assignments updated. I'm guessing by 5 o'clock, within the next hour. Okay. You want me to do them first? I can do the listening assignments first. You're just anxious to hear the Just Waldo, right?
I am excited to hear that, yeah.
Okay, I'll do the listening first. I'll do it right now. Any other questions?
I wanted to make a comment on the assigned listening that we had last week.
Yeah.
It was, I think it was for chapter 10. I was pleasantly surprised when I heard Psalm 134 in another language. I was like, wait, what is this? And I'm like, oh, it's the doxology in another language.
Yep.
And I'm, yeah. So
Yeah.
just that comment.
Yeah, great. That's a great comment. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Between that 134 and then of course Ein Festeberg and then birds sing joyfully unto God, which is in English. Some of this stuff is actually, and lots of people do Magnum Mysterium. We've done O Magnum Mysterium at Calvary. So a lot of this stuff is still being used today. It certainly has influenced music of today. Good, thank you for that. Other comments? All right. Thank you all. Go watch a sad movie.
Oh,
Okay.
go watch a Marvel movie.
A Marvel movie. Josh, you missed the conversation.
No, I didn't.
He was here.
I was here.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, Marvel movies. Bye, all. See you next week.
All right.